An entire town went silent overnight, and what was left behind didn't make sense. One day, families were eating dinner, kids were playing outside, and workers were still at their shops. The very next morning, the entire population gone. No bodies, no farewell notes, just a town frozen in time, as if everyone had been plucked away mid-breath. What makes this story so disturbing isn't just the fact that no one was ever found. It's what was left behind. Imagine walking into a place where the laundry is still hanging on the line, meals are still half-eaten, the church bell is still swinging from the night before, but there isn't a single living soul, not even a stray dog. Now, before we jump into the bizarre details of this case, I need your help. If you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious, then you're in the right place, because that's all we cover here, and we upload once a week. But if you can support this channel by subscribing, then we'll upload more often. So if that sounds like your thing, please, do me a favor. Take the like button to the fanciest steakhouse in town, order it a massive ribeye, and then halfway through the meal, just vanish. Leave the like button wondering what happened, and while you're at it, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our future uploads. Okay, back to the story. The first reports of this vanishing came when a group of travelers passed through the area the following morning, so they expected to be greeted by shopkeepers, kids running through the streets, maybe a dog barking at strangers. Instead, what they found was nothing. Total silence. The streets were empty, but everything looked as though the townsfolk had just stepped away for a moment. Doors hung wide open. A barber's chair was still reclined with clippings of fresh hair on the floor. A cup of coffee, still warm, sat on a counter. At first, the travelers thought this was a prank, maybe some kind of bizarre festival tradition where everyone hides. But as they walked deeper into the streets, the truth became impossible to ignore. The town wasn't celebrating. It had been abandoned in an instant. And here's where things get truly unnerving. The town's records showed no warning of evacuation, no sickness, no storms on the horizon. People had plans for the following day. Appointments written in ledgers, freshly purchased goods sitting in shops, even a school blackboard with lessons half scribbled across it. It was as though time itself had stopped, leaving only these haunting snapshots of life interrupted. Of course, that's just the beginning, because as investigators dug deeper, they discovered strange clues scattered throughout the town, clues that made less sense the more you tried to explain them, and one of those clues still sparks debates to this day. When people talk about ghost towns, they usually mean a place that slowly withered away over decades. Businesses closing, families moving, and eventually the last few residents leaving until only dust and memories remain. But this wasn't that kind of story. This was different. This was sudden. The setting was a small settlement, tucked far from any bustling city. Some say it resembled Kiel, Wisconsin in the 1850s, a place with its share of strange vanishings. Others compare it to Joer Verde, Brazil in the 1970s, where nearly 600 residents were rumored to have vanished overnight, leaving behind nothing but whispers. Whatever the comparison, the reality was the same. This was a town that had simply stopped existing. One moment, alive with families, children, and workers. The next, silent. The first outsiders to notice something was wrong were a group of tradesmen passing through. They were supposed to deliver goods, cloth, tools, and food supplies. As they crested the hill overlooking the town, everything looked normal. Smoke curled lazily from chimneys. Clothes swayed on washing lines. It gave every impression of a community going about its daily life. But when the men entered the main street, the illusion shattered. The smoke wasn't fresh. It was fading, like it had been left to burn itself out hours before. The closer they got, the more unnerving it became. There were no children laughing, no shopkeepers sweeping their porches, no dogs barking at strangers, just silence. They knocked on doors. Nothing. They pushed some open, and inside were scenes that looked frozen in time. A wooden table with bread halfway sliced, a cup of coffee sitting on the counter, still ringed with warmth. A chair tipped slightly back as if someone had just stood up and never returned. At the blacksmith's, iron tools lay scattered on the floor, a horseshoe half-formed in the forge. The fire had died down, but the coals were still faintly glowing, like the work had been abandoned only moments earlier. And the strangest detail of all? The animals. Horses were still tied to posts, stamping nervously in the dirt. Chickens pecked at the ground, but their coops were open as though their keepers had simply walked away mid-task. Nothing had been taken, no belongings packed. It was as though life had simply evaporated. At first, the tradesmen were uneasy but rational. Maybe there had been some emergency, an evacuation. Maybe a fire or disease had swept through, forcing people to leave suddenly. But as they searched for signs, no notices were posted, no carts were loaded, no trails of footprints leaving the town. Instead, it looked like people had stepped out of their homes for just a moment and never returned. The men left quickly that day, their wagons rattling over the dirt roads in near silence, but word of the empty town spread fast, and soon authorities would arrive to investigate. What they found would be even stranger. When investigators finally arrived in the town, they expected to find an answer. Some rational explanation for why hundreds of people had suddenly disappeared. But what they found instead were clues that only deepened the mystery. The first odd detail was at the carpenter's shop. Inside, sawdust still hung in the air. A wooden chair lay half-finished on the workbench, and the blade of the saw was buried halfway through a plank. It was as if the carpenter had stepped out for a quick break and never returned. But there were no footprints, no drag marks, no signs of struggle. Just a task abandoned in the middle of a motion, frozen in time. Investigators noted this wasn't a one-off. Nearly every workshop they entered told the same story. Blacksmithing hammers dropped mid-swing, sewing needles stuck in cloth, bread dough left unbaked in stone ovens. Life had been interrupted, not ended, and that distinction terrified them. In one of the homes, a dining table was set for 4. Plates of stew sat untouched, spoons laid neatly beside bowls, and one chair was pulled out just slightly, as if someone had just sat down to eat. The food was still warm when it was first discovered. That meant whatever happened in this town, it had happened fast. Some investigators whispered that it felt like the people had been called away mid-bite. But called away by what? Then came the schoolhouse. Rows of desks were still lined neatly in place, small slates resting on top with scribbles of math problems left unfinished. But it was the chalkboard at the front of the room that sent chills down everyone's spine. Across it, in bold, jagged handwriting, were the words, "They came at night." There was no signature, no explanation, just those 4 words. The chalk was still resting in the tray below, as if the teacher, or perhaps a student, had scrawled it in haste and then vanished. From that moment, the disappearance wasn't just strange, it was sinister. The last and perhaps most chilling discovery was at the church on the edge of town. The doors were wide open, and inside the pews were empty. But hanging above, the heavy brass bell was still swinging slightly, as though it had been rung only moments before. Investigators climbed up to stop it, but the rope was frayed, almost shredded, as if it had been yanked violently, again and again, in desperation. Was it a signal, a warning, or the last thing someone did before vanishing, like the rest? Everywhere they looked, the investigators found fragments of lives cut short mid-motion, tools, Meals, messages, signals, all left behind. But no bodies, no voices, no answers. And with each clue, the question grew louder. What force could have swept through this town so quickly, so completely, that not a single soul remained? When word spread about the town's disappearance, people were desperate for answers. And soon, theories began pouring in, each one more chilling than the last. The most logical explanation was disease. Perhaps an illness had swept through the town, forcing everyone to flee in panic. This theory made sense at first. After all, history is filled with examples of villages abandoned during plagues. But when investigators combed the homes, they found no signs of sickness. No hurriedly written warnings, no graves, no bodies. Food was left uncovered, personal belongings untouched. If disease had struck, wouldn't at least one person have died before the town emptied? Wouldn't there be signs of struggle or burial? Instead, there was only silence, so the disease theory collapsed under its own weight. The next theory was far darker. Some suggested the town had been caught in the crossfire of a secret military experiment. The 20th century was full of stories about governments testing chemical agents, radiation, or sound-based weapons in remote areas. At first, this seemed plausible. The tools abandoned mid-use, the meals half-eaten. Maybe the residents were suddenly incapacitated. But the problem was, if this had been an experiment gone wrong, there should have been evidence. Residue, equipment, a trail of outsiders. Instead, there was nothing. The town was too perfectly clean, as though deliberately scrubbed of answers. That raised an even more terrifying thought. Maybe it wasn't an accident at all. Others believed the town had been under the grip of a cult. The strange message on the chalkboard, "They came at night," sounded almost ritualistic. Could a leader have persuaded everyone to leave together? The problem with this idea was logistics. Cult migrations leave evidence, packed carts, written doctrines, footprints leading away. Here, there was none of that. Clothes were still in drawers. Tools were still in use. Even the animals were left behind, untended. If it was a voluntary departure, why leave everything, even their means of survival, to rot? Unless it wasn't voluntary at all. And then came the theory people whispered but rarely wrote down. Something supernatural. Stories of shadowy visitors, of entities that could sweep through a place and take what they wanted without leaving a trace. The church bell swinging violently, the cryptic message, the meals abandoned in haste. It was unnerving how well these details fit the idea of a force beyond comprehension. But even this theory had holes. Why this town, and why that night? And if it truly was something otherworldly, why were no marks left behind? No signs of a struggle, but just emptiness. One by one, each theory unraveled. Disease didn't fit. Military experiments left no trace. A cult departure was impossible to stage so cleanly, and the supernatural, while haunting, explained nothing concrete. The truth was still out there, lurking between the clues, and it was far stranger than anyone wanted to admit. For days, officials scoured the town, combing through every house, every building, desperate for something that could explain what happened. Most of what they found were the same haunting images. Meals left mid-bite, tools dropped mid-use, a message on a chalkboard that read, "They came at night." But then, in a small home at the edge of town, investigators noticed something different, something that didn't fit with the timeline everyone believed. Inside this modest two-room home, the kitchen table was bare, unlike the others with half-eaten food. The beds were made. It was almost too orderly compared to the chaos everywhere else. But sitting on the nightstand was a folded newspaper. Its pages were crisp, fresh, and it carried a date that stunned the search team. It was dated one day after the supposed disappearance. That single detail changed everything. If the whole town had vanished overnight, then who had been around to fetch or read that paper? At first, investigators assumed it had been delivered early, maybe left at the doorstep before the disappearance. But the ink was too fresh. The print matched the later edition, one not even available the day before. Someone had handled it. This meant one of two things. Either the timeline was wrong, and at least one person had survived after the mass disappearance, or someone came back. The thought was terrifying. Had a lone survivor wandered this town, collecting the newspaper, tidying their house, waiting for rescue, or had whoever, or whatever, took the townspeople returned to leave a mocking clue? Investigators searched the area around that home again, looking for footprints, cart tracks, anything. And they did find something. In the thin layer of dust by the back door, a single footprint. Just one. Too fresh to match the others already fading around town. And strangely, it seemed to lead into the house, but not out. Whoever it belonged to, they had entered, but there was no sign they'd ever left. The newspaper and the footprint reopened every theory. Some believed it proved that at least one person had remained behind, trapped in the town after everyone else was gone. Maybe they had witnessed what happened, maybe even written the message on the chalkboard. Others whispered something darker, that the footprint didn't belong to a survivor at all, that it belonged to whatever had taken the townsfolk, a presence that returned unseen and left just enough behind to taunt whoever came looking. To this day, the newspaper still exists in an archive, yellowed with age, its date clear as ever. No one has been able to explain how it ended up there, or why no further evidence of life was ever found in that house. And so the most chilling question lingers. If the town truly vanished overnight, then who was still there the next day? By the time investigators closed their search, they had no answers. Not one body, not one message explaining the disappearance. Just silence. To this day, no one has explained where the town went, or why their belongings were never reclaimed. The families vanished, possessions left behind, food still on tables, as if life itself had been snuffed out mid-sentence, and yet the town remains a scar on the landscape. Travelers still pass through, and some say they feel watched. Others claim to hear distant sounds, a bell swinging, footsteps in empty halls, voices that vanish when you get too close. Whether those are echoes of the past or something else entirely, no one knows. But what unsettles researchers most is the single overlooked detail. The newspaper dated a day later than the supposed disappearance. That one object suggests someone remained after the rest were gone. Someone who walked the streets alone, saw what happened, and then vanished too. Or maybe it wasn't a survivor at all. Maybe it was a reminder, deliberately left behind, a way of saying, we were here and we can come back. The official reports filed the case away under unresolved. Theories were published, debated, and discarded. Some whispered of disease, others of cults or experiments. But the truth is this: there was never enough evidence to close the case. The families of those who vanished never got answers. No graves to mourn at, no explanations to cling to, just an entire community erased. And that brings us back to the very first clue you heard. Tools dropped mid-use, meals left half-eaten, a message scrawled in chalk. They came at night. At the time, it seemed cryptic, but now knowing everything you've heard, it feels a lot darker, doesn't it? If you sat down to dinner tonight, and in the middle of your meal, something came to take everything away, what would you leave behind? What would be your last mark, your final unfinished moment? So here's where I want to hear from you. What do you think really happened to this town? Was it disease? A secret experiment? A cult? Or something we can't explain? Drop your theories in the comments. And as always, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place. We upload once a week, but if can support this channel by subscribing, we'll upload more often. So make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next story. Until next time, be careful where you stop for the night. Some towns don't want to be found.